Something dangerous is quietly happening to the global financial system. And most people have no idea, not because the information is hidden, but because the scale of the problem is almost impossible to comprehend. Right now, governments around the world owe more money than at any point in human history. Not billions, not trillions, hundreds of trillions. Global debt has now surpassed $300 trillion. That is more than 3 times the size of the entire global economy. And the number keeps rising. Every hour, every day, every year. The United States alone now owes more than $34 trillion. Just paying the interest on that debt is becoming one of the largest expenses in the federal budget. And America is not alone. Japan's government debt is more than 250% of its entire economy. Many European nations are deeply indebted. China's local governments and property sector are quietly carrying massive hidden debt. The world has built an economic system powered by borrowing. And for decades, that system seemed to work. But there is a problem. Debt must eventually be repaid, with interest. And when debt grows faster than the economy that supports it, when the system begins to crack, the uncomfortable truth is that the modern financial system now depends on something extremely fragile, a constant expansion of debt. And once you understand how the system actually works, you start to realize something even more unsettling. This situation was not created by accident. It is built directly into the structure of modern money itself. Most people believe money is created when governments print it, but that is not how modern money works. In reality, most money is created through debt. When governments spend more than they collect in taxes, they borrow money, they issue government bonds. Investors buy those bonds, and governments promise to repay them later with interest. This system has existed for centuries. But over the past 50 years, it has expanded dramatically because modern economies depend on constant growth. Growth in spending, growth in investment, growth in consumption. And growth often requires borrowing. Governments borrow to stimulate the economy. Corporations borrow to expand their businesses. Consumers borrow to buy homes, cars, and education. Debt became the fuel of modern economic growth. But fuel can also become a trap, because every dollar borrowed must eventually be repaid with interest. And over time, that interest begins to grow faster than anyone expected. Imagine someone who owes money on a credit card. At first, the payments are manageable, but if they keep borrowing more, eventually the interest payments start to grow. At some point, they stop reducing the debt. They are only paying interest. And if they cannot afford the interest, they borrow even more. This is exactly what many governments are now doing. Instead of paying down their debt, they borrow more money to cover the interest on the money they already owe. Economists call this the debt trap, a situation where debt grows faster than the economy itself. And globally, that is exactly what has been happening for decades. Government borrowing rises, interest payments increase, debt expands further, and the system becomes more fragile each year. But here is the strange part. Despite these enormous debt levels, the global financial system has not collapsed, at least not yet. Which raises an important question. How has the system managed to survive for so long? The answer lies in a mechanism that most people experience every day, without realizing it. That mechanism is inflation. Inflation slowly reduces the real value of debt. Imagine borrowing money 20 years ago. Back then, a house might have cost $150,000. Today, that same house might cost $500,000. The dollars you borrowed years ago are now worth much less, which means the debt becomes easier to manage. This is why inflation often plays a quiet role in debt-heavy economies. It slowly erodes the burden of massive borrowing. But inflation has consequences. When prices rise faster than wages, people lose purchasing power, savings lose value, the cost of living rises, and everyday life becomes more expensive, which means the burden of the debt system does not disappear. It simply moves from governments to the public. And most people never realize it. They just feel like money does not go as far as it used to, because in many ways, it doesn't. Massive debt problems are not new. History is full of similar moments. In the late Roman Empire, the government faced enormous military expenses and rising debt. Instead of reducing spending, they began reducing the silver content in their coins. This was an early form of inflation. At first, the change was barely noticeable, but over time, trust in the currency declined, trade slowed, and the economy weakened. Centuries later, the Weimar Republic in Germany faced crushing debt after World War I. To manage the burden, the government began printing money. At first it seemed manageable, but inflation quickly spiraled out of control. Eventually, people needed wheelbarrows full of money just to buy food. Even in modern history, we see similar patterns. Before the financial crisis of 2008, debt levels across banks, corporations, and households reached dangerous levels. When the system cracked, central banks were forced to intervene with enormous bailouts and emergency money creation, once again increasing the total amount of debt in the system. Every major financial crisis in history shares one common pattern. Debt builds slowly, over many years, then suddenly, something breaks. Some of the world's most experienced investors are paying close attention to this problem. Billionaire investor Ray Dalio has repeatedly warned about what he calls the long-term debt cycle, a period where debt levels become so large that traditional economic tools stop working. Hedge funds, institutional investors, and central banks closely monitor government debt levels because, historically, periods of extreme borrowing often precede major financial disruptions. When debt becomes too large, governments face difficult choices: raise taxes, cut spending, or allow inflation to reduce the real value of the debt. None of these options are politically easy, which is why debt levels often continue rising until the system reaches its limits. So if global debt is so dangerous, why hasn't the system already collapsed? The answer is confidence. Financial systems are built on trust. Investors buy government bonds because they believe those governments will repay them. As long as that belief exists, the system can continue operating. Central banks also play a critical role. During financial crises, they lower interest rates. They buy government bonds. They inject liquidity into financial markets, all to maintain stability. But confidence is fragile. If investors begin to question the sustainability of debt, interest rates can rise rapidly, borrowing becomes more expensive, and the system can face enormous pressure, which is why economists around the world watch debt levels so closely. Because once confidence starts to break, debt crises can spread very quickly. Debt itself is not always dangerous. It can help economies grow. It can fund infrastructure, innovation, and investment. But when debt grows faster than the economy for too long, the system becomes unstable. And today, global debt has reached levels the world has never seen before, which raises a question few governments are comfortable answering: not whether the debt problem matters, but how long the system can continue expanding before something finally forces it to stop. If you want to understand the hidden forces shaping the global financial system, subscribe to the channel, because here we break down the systems behind money, markets, and power. And once you understand how these systems actually work, you start seeing the world very differently.